Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown. An EMT's terrifying experience. I'm an EMT on weekends now, and I was a former paramedic. I have a decent story about something that happened to me quite some time ago, and I always thought if I were to experience something weird at work, it'd be in any one of the ambulances that I've used on account of all the souls that have passed away through them. My partner and I, that night, weren't that lucky. I used to work in the city, and our company used to cover the surrounding towns. Only a couple of 100,000 people with suburbs and beyond that, just a river valley and woods. Nothing really special. We had to respond to the fringe of our coverage area in another town one night, and after almost getting there, we wound up being cancelled by first responders en route. And this happened around 4:30 a.m. and it was a Wednesday and it was in the fall. So the ride back to town was only about 20 minutes away, but this was kind of a long straight road and it had like dim street lights. And there was a thick forest on both sides. So I was riding in the passenger seat and I was looking down at my laptop and I was writing up the cancel tag and mentally preparing myself to go home because it had been a pretty long night and I was quite tired. And then my partner turned around and he said, "Do you see that?" And he began to slow down. Now the cab was illuminated by the laptop, so I just shut it down and I looked up. And I kind of squinted a little to see what he was pointing at. And there I saw, only about 100 feet or so in front of us, a dog. A very, very large dog. And it was like this silver gray color. And it had these really straight, long ears that just sort of, pointed up quite high. And it had like little tufts at the top of them. All of a sudden, and this is the terrifying part, it stood up. And then I noticed that this thing was about 4 feet high at the shoulders. This was enormous. It was like a cow or something, like the size of a cow, but it was very distinctly some kind of dog. My partner just slowed to a crawl, thinking that maybe this strange dog is hurt or something, and maybe it has a tag or a collar. And surely such a magnificent animal has, an owner somewhere. So we slow down to a crawl, and then that's when this really weird stuff started to happen that I will never forget. And it's the day I started believing that not all things are what they seem. Now, the idle of the ambulance isn't its usual roar. We're kind of creeping at about 5 miles an hour and we were gaining. I was on the passenger side and it was on my side of the road. And the plan was for him to put flashers on and for me to whistle or hoot or, just call to this dog to see if it would, want to come over and, if it needed help. Or maybe it was just a street dog and it was tough enough to just live out there like that. I don't know. Anyway, we closed the 100-foot gap to around 25 to 30 feet away from him. As we closed our distance and right at that, maybe 10-yard mark or so, my senses were suddenly very alert. And it was like, a fight or flight kind of thing. And I was very aware of how much possible danger I was in, and my blood turned cold. The dog had stood up on its hind legs now. My view of this was from behind, and the thing had shoulders that would put, Vince Wilfork's to shame. It was a massive, massive creature. My partner stopped the truck without speaking. It was like he was just dumbstruck. The beast cocked its head to the side ever so slightly to the left, revealing a single yellow eye that was shining in the light of the ambulance. And then it turned to my side, the right side, of the woods and bolted. It was over as soon as it started. The thing that has always bothered me, though, is that little head tilt. I got the sense of dread before he stood up. It was almost telekinetic, if that makes any sense. I got this very strong feeling that it was like it was saying, "I know you mean well, move on, and I was never here." Then it just vanished. I've seen many canines stand on their hind legs. I'm talking about like giant breed dogs and so on. I have never seen a hellhound sprint with precision over a guardrail and brush that just messed with my head other than that night. The only thing I could come up with is, after a lot of research, was that it was something from, the legends of the Michigan Dogman and the Beast of Bray Road. It was like, something to do with that. Now, I live in southern New England, however, and we're not really known for, Bigfoot sightings or crazy cryptozoological stories. I don't know what to believe in this. And, I'm not sure. Was it a werewolf? But what I do know is what I saw. And it looked like the classic werewolf. And that's all I can say. I know nothing more other than what I saw. That's it. I have no explanation other than that. It makes me wonder if this creature has been sighted by anybody else in the area. And, if I had seen it, I would sort of want to know that, and I would start to research a little and find out if this was something that was, hanging around that particular area for some reason. Just like the Beast of Bray Road and the Michigan Dogman, they were seen, I believe, in specific locations by a lot of people. Certainly fascinating. Good job you weren't walking and you're in the ambulance, because that would not have been good. Overnight security in an old hospital. I used to work the overnight security in one of the oldest and largest hospitals in the US. My fellow security officers and I all have stories about this same building in particular, but the one that I'll tell is the one that happened to me specifically. The backstory for this building is that it was built in the late 1800s, I believe. It was the original psychiatric building for this particular hospital. Now, being the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders back then and mental illness. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. So with both of these factors combined, you can pretty much guess that some terrible crap really did get done in there to these misunderstood and, unfortunate psych patients in this particular building. A couple of years before I started working the security job there, this building had been converted into offices after the newly built part of the hospital dedicated a section for an updated psych ward. So my story, my experience, so I was doing my rounds for that night in this particular building. Now at night, this building was empty due to recently being converted into the offices, and the drones who worked there wanting to leave, promptly at a certain time, if not earlier. In some of their haste, they would leave their office doors unlocked, which is a big no-no due to the medical information that's located in their offices. So it was our duty to go to each floor and make sure that every door was locked for security reasons. And if it wasn't, to, lock it ourselves. I did my initial sweep of the building to make sure it was clear and that nobody was in the building, and then I proceeded to do my door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so I could check both sides of the hallway's doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were two sets of doors that you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end. Everything seemed fine. It was all secure, so, time for the next floor. So I left the two sets of doors from the dead end office and I stood absolutely frozen with what I saw. Every door was ajar, set perfectly so that their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again. And one wheelchair at the end of this said hallway was facing towards the steps. Now, I had heard other security officers outright, just refuse that set of rounds due to the strange crap that would happen there, but I just kind of laughed it off until that night happened. I never, ever took those rounds again, I can tell you. Anyway, more things happened there. For the second story, the old children's ICU is currently under construction and it's to be turned into medical labs. So we have to patrol the area too. Once again, to make sure the area was secure or to report if the contractor or foreman had stayed to plan for the next day. When patrolling this area, several security officers have also reported seeing a single white male child around the age of 5 to 7 with short brown hair, kind of like a 90s bowl cut hairstyle. I personally dismissed this, and this was before the psych ward incident, by the way, as a tall tale told with the intent to just scare me because I was new at the time and so on. So I got the building's patrol one night, and a foreman who stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because a kid locked himself in a room and I don't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there, or something to that effect. So I unlocked the door for him. I looked into a room that must have been about 10 by 8 size, and I looked for about 10 minutes, just to make sure that my eyes weren't deceiving me, but I saw no kid in there. So I called it in as a false alarm and finished my patrol. Anyway, another story. I have so many of these, but here's another one that kind of really stuck with me. This special detail, Aka babysitting, a violent psych patient, along with another security officer. He woke up in the middle of the night and he recognized the other officer and said hello. He saw me and he immediately started screaming at me not to hurt him. Now, I'm kind of a large guy. I'm 6'2" and 250 pounds, but I try not to make myself too intimidating around psych patients as to, not escalate the situation. So he kept screaming for me not to hurt him, and he said if I promised not to, he would make something good happen for me. I promise, he calms down, goes back to sleep, and I just forget about it. Next day, I got a permanent set of rounds and a pretty good promotion. Easily a coincidence? But interesting nonetheless. So the fourth story, and this is the final one for now. A fellow security officer had rounds in this, same psych building, and he heard a call on the radio in what could only be described as this kind of dry-throated kind of terror voice for one officer for backup. I was close by, so I responded to his call and I let him know I was on my way. When I got there, he had his head between his knees and was silently crying with a shattered chandelier a couple of feet next to him on the floor. Now, before I had experienced the abnormal happenings in this building, I would have written off his testimony as, some kind of weird coincidence or, a prank or something. But he claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started swinging wildly until it started to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go of and allowed to move, and scrambled out of the way before it hit him. Now, he didn't look good, I helped him to get up, I calmed him down, he looked really pale, and I took him back to the supervisor. She yelled to one of our other supervisors, "Almost lost another one in that building." The other supervisor laughed and said, "Why do you think we send the new guys? Ha ha. You know I don't even like going over there." That guy is my roommate and hates when I bring up that experience. Suffice it to say, I decided to quit that job and move on because, I'd kind of had enough by that time. Yeah, goodness knows what happened in some of those old psychiatric hospitals, but certainly there are so many horror stories out there about how the patients were treated, the abuse, the murders, the experiments. I mean, you can only imagine just the trauma in there and the negative energy that would linger, a long, long time after that. So that certainly doesn't surprise me. That place is haunted. Not the kind of place you'd want to sleep in. The apparition. My mom used to work as an RN at a hospital in a small western town. Now, this hospital was connected to a senior living home, and at night, the RN overwatched both sides of the building, hospital and living room, and she was usually the overnight RN and would have either one or two CNAs working as well. She has experienced a number of things in that place, and in particular, this apparition, which she has experienced about 6 or 7 other times during her 10-year stint there, and everyone has referred to the apparition, the ghost, as the man in black. Each experience was pretty identical except for the area of the building where this thing would appear. So frequently throughout the night, she would have to do her rounds, checking vitals, etc., etc., and would have to walk around a corner from the nurse's station, ER, towards the 6 beds in the hospital, and towards the senior home. She would see the apparition either right after rounding the corner or right after walking out of a room and walking to the next. Outside of the next room, she would see the same apparition. Now, the apparition was of this person in a black, kind of Old West type suit with worn black cowboy boots and worn black cowboy hat to match. The creepiest thing about this man, assuming it's a man, is that his face was not distinct. She would describe it as though it was a man's face that was drawn with charcoal and it was slightly smeared, making it kind of blurry. He was about 6'5" and would tower over her, and she's only about 5'5". But whenever she would see him, whether it's 10 feet or 3 feet away, he would stand there looking at her and then turn and walk into the room he was outside of. When she would walk into that room, there would be absolutely no sign of him anywhere in any place. The first few times it scared her to a panic, But she actually slowly just went on, without letting it freak her out. She learned how to handle this, these visitations and seeing this creature. But the interesting thing was that with this man's presence, when he walked into the rooms where the patients were in, that patient would end up needing extra attention. In other words, it was like his presence was affecting their health and, making them worse. So the other interesting thing is that in about 90% of all the experiences seen by other RNs as well, the patient's health would start to deteriorate in the next few days. And most of those patients would pass away shortly after. So, whenever the RN who was on duty overnight saw the man in black, extra precautions would be taken with that patient. It was like a warning for the RNs. Another weird thing about the apparition is that it is always seen by just the RN. Not a single CNA has personally seen the apparition for some bizarre reason. My mom always said that he knew who would be able to help the most at the time. I, on the other hand, took it as the complete opposite. I always thought that it was almost to mock the RNs because he would let them know that something was going to happen, but they could not do anything about it. Even though I am not an RN and I haven't seen him, it still creeps me out every time I walk down the halls and she points out where she saw him. So it's interesting, but I can't help wondering, who was he? Why is he there exactly? Well, that sounds suspiciously to me like possibly the angel of death, who is, getting people ready to leave because it's coming up to their time, perhaps. Um, so it's possible that that's what it is. It's either that or it's some potentially negative entity that is there to mess with the sick and dying, and he just kind of helps them along a little bit. So it's hard to know, but the first thing that stood out for me was definitely the angel of death getting ready to take those souls somewhere else.